Here's one that's fun. Steve Darrow asks, aviation question, drink. Are all aircraft on the downwind leg of a pattern required to fly at the same speed regardless of type? I live near a bedpost at the south end of the pattern to runway 36 left at Dallas-Fort Worth, and I marvel at how relatively slow the heavies fly. They look as if they are a single knot above stall speed. I know this is an optical illusion going on, but it got me wondering. I won't spend all night on this, I promise. When airplanes land at a runway, and even if it's controlled or uncontrolled, the plan, and it's an important plan, is that airplanes always land into the wind. Always. If it's dead calm, it doesn't matter which way you go. But if there's any wind at all, you land into the wind. And if you think about it, there's a perfectly good reason for that. They take off into the wind too, and for the same reason. And here's how it works. Let's use nice round numbers. Let's say that your airplane flies at 100 knots. And let's say when you get to 100 knots, that's when you take off. And let's say you're flying into a 20-knot headwind, which is what you're supposed to be doing. The wing doesn't care how fast you're going over the ground. The wing only cares how fast air is moving over it. So if you've got a 20-knot headwind and you're going down into the wind, your ground speed has to only be 80 knots because the wing thinks it's going 100. You're going 80 knots over the ground, but the air is moving towards you at another 20, so you get your 100 knots and you fly, but you're flying at 80 knots over the ground, which means you don't need as much runway because you're not going as fast over the ground. Turn that around, and what you get is, if you have to take off at 100 knots and you've got a 20-knot tailwind, you have to be doing 120 knots over the ground. You got to be doing 100 knots to get the wing over where you want it, and then you've got to do another 20 knots to make up for the fact that the wind is blowing backwards over the wing. So landing into the wind is a real nice thing to do, and as long as the wind's coming straight down the runway and is relatively stable wind, then the more wind you have, the better it is. You can actually, it's possible, I haven't done it in my Sky Arrow, I came awful close. You can fly a conventional airplane backwards, but it's very rare, and you got to have like a Piper Cub or something really slow, like a Sky Arrow. For example, I came pretty close to it once. If my airplane will stall at 40 knots and I'm flying at 50 knots through the air and I'm flying into a 30-knot headwind, then I'm doing 20 miles an hour over the ground. If I'm doing 50 knots and I fly into a 60-knot headwind, I'm moving backwards. I'm moving backwards. I'm moving forward through the air, but the air is pushing me back faster than I can move forward. So we had to get that out of the way to answer this question because I love aviation questions, and if you don't like it, now would be a good time to go get your sandwich. So speeds on the downwind. I just glanced at the question, and I didn't realize he was talking about heavy aircraft, commercial aircraft. So two answers for you here, Steve. In general aviation, when he says, do you fly the same speed on the downwind? As I said, let's say the wind is doing 20 knots and you're flying in the air. Now you're flying at 150 knots. When you're going downwind, setting up to turn around and come into the runway, you're flying at 150 knots plus a 20-knot tailwind. That means you're moving 170 knots over the ground. The second you turn around and head back towards the runway to land into the wind, you're still flying at 150 knots, but now you not only don't have the 20-knot tailwind, you got a 20-knot headwind, so you're doing 170 downwind, turn around, head back for the runway on final, and now all of a sudden you're doing 130 knots over the ground. The wing is doing 150 knots all the time. The wing doesn't know and the wing doesn't care. So the question was, do they have to fly the same speed downwind and so on? In general aviation, I'll have a big celebration for this. I'm probably within 15 hours of 1,000 hours in the air. That's something like 40 days and nights continuously. It's quite a number, actually. And in 1,000 hours of flying general aviation, I've never once heard a general aviation pilot be given a target airspeed by air traffic control by the tower. Never once have I heard anybody tell somebody on downwind or turning base to final, hey, I need you faster, or whatever. I have heard several times, I'm going to turn you in front of there's a Learjet behind you at 5 miles in trail, expedite it to the runway, but I've never been given an airspeed. I've never been saying, fly, you're downwind, you're flying it at 90 knots, slow to 80. However, if you listen to, so that's general aviation, and that's where I thought the question came from. So no, in general aviation, you fly your airplane downwind, base, final, all of that, at the speed that the airplane's supposed to be flown at for landing, which is pretty narrow band, really, if you're going to do it right. You want to fly just fast enough so that you don't stall, and just slow enough so that you don't use as much runway as you use as little runway as possible. Now, with commercial aviation, which I realize is what the question is at Dallas-Fort Worth, which is a rather large airport for a little puddle jumper. He says, I marvel at how relatively slow the heavies fly. They're a single knot above stall speed. This is, in fact, as you realize, you say you know there's an optical illusion going on, but it got you wondering. I'll get to the optical illusion in a second. When you listen to air traffic control setting up commercial jets for approaches into, I'll just take LAX because I know LAX better, they're constantly giving speed adjustments, but they're giving speed adjustments within a relatively narrow band. So let's say that you'd fly an approach at, I don't know, say 150 knots, something like that for a 737. I don't know what the number is, but somebody does. It's probably 160 knots, something like that. And you'll hear controllers occasionally say, Delta 249 or heavy increase speed to 160 knots, or slow speed to 140 knots, and the pilots will almost certainly do that because the airspeed that the controller is giving them is within their safe flight envelope. Speed up a little bit, slow down a little bit. If you got guys right hot on your tail, they'll tell the guy in front, hey, speed it up a little bit. They'll tell the guy right behind him, hey, slow it down a little bit, increases the spacing, everybody's happy. But that's a relatively minor adjustments in speed. And I've never heard them in general aviation, although I hear them all the time in commercial aviation. And that's largely because commercial aviation is not just an airplane in the pattern. They're not in the pattern. These airplanes are 60 miles, 100 miles, 120 miles out sometimes. I just got a question from Woody Fool. I'm going to see if I can save that for a minute here. So basically, when you've got airplanes stacked up and you've got 40 of them, and I've seen at LAX, I've seen 40 landing lights on a really busy night, like string of pearls going all the way out on a 3-degree glide slope, and the furthest ones are probably 70, 80, 90, 100 miles away. Now, when you've got this giant string of camels that are coming into the same hole in the wall that they're going to walk through, when all these camels going at the same hole in the wall, you're going to have to see, okay, this camel's going too fast, and if he hits that guy, then he's going to bunch this up. Then they're just constantly looking at who's slow, who's fast, slow down a little bit, speed up a little bit to keep this conveyor belt of aircraft spaced just about the way they want it. And just about the way they want it means you are as close to the airplane in front of you as you can possibly be without any danger of hitting it on the landing. But if you are any much further than that, that means we're not getting as many airplanes in as we possibly can. They've got this down to an absolute science. 17 years now, 16 years without a single fatality on a major American airline. Not just on the airline, on a major, a decent-sized airplane like a 737 or something. So that's commercial airline. And finally, I'll just go to the optical illusion thing you mentioned. It is an optical illusion, and the optical illusion works like this. The bigger a jet is, the slower it appears to be flying. And if you think about it, there's a good reason for that. Let's just say again, as we said, that both airplanes have to do 150 knots. Now, my airplane doesn't have to do 150 knots on approach. As a matter of fact, that's insanely fast for my airplane. My airplane will fly the approach probably on, get under 100 knots, drop the gear, and fly the base turn at 90 knots, slow into, say, 80 and 70 over the numbers, flare at 60. So, but let's just say that I'm flying my long easy to land on one runway at LAX, and on a runway right next to me, just a little, quarter mile further away, is a 747. And my long easy and the 747 are both doing 150 knots. They're both going at exactly the same speed through the air. They're both doing the same speed through the air, but the relative sizes are so enormously different that my long easy could fly for 2 or 3 seconds and run the length of that 747. It's such a bigger 150 knots compared to that size is a lot less impressive than 150 knots compared to this tiny little thing. So the little airplane looks like it's going faster. And the bigger they are, the slower they appear to be going. But they're all going at the same speed. And often, a big airplane you can see from much further away. It's not that you couldn't see the long easy or anything, but you see a little speck. But you see this gigantic mountain of a thing moving just as fast as my little itty-bitty little airplane is. It seems unnatural that something that big could be moving that slowly, but it's not moving that slowly. It's moving the same speed as everything else. It just appears to be moving so slowly because it's further away than you think it is. It's further away than you think it is because it's so much bigger. And that's the end of that little aviation story, although our friend Woody Fool came up with a question, always grabs my attention when I see an aviation thing. Bill, when you tell center your type, they estimate your speed to enter the pattern, right? Well, first of all, you don't really talk to center with the pattern, and there's not really a pattern in major airports, Woody Fool. There's a pattern. General aviation airplanes fly a pattern. You approach the airport, you got a runway here. Here's runway. I'm not going to reverse it. You're going down here. This is runway 16 right at Van Nuys. And the wind is coming that way, so we want to land that way. The pattern is you enter on a 45-degree angle, you fly your downwind, you turn your base, you turn final, and you land into the wind. That's the pattern. And if you're doing a touch and go, you're back up you go. You fly down and then you fly crosswind, you fly downwind again. And this little thing is called the pattern. The British call it the circuit because they get everything wrong. But basically, you're making this little pattern. And usually it's left turns. 16 right, it's actually right turns. But usually left, 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 and back you go. But commercial airlines don't do that. Commercial airplanes don't fly patterns. Commercial airplanes do the one thing that you're not supposed to do in general aviation airplanes, which is they fly a straight-in approach. They don't do this pattern thing and turn and turn and turn. They're on a rail that goes out 70, 80, 90, 100 miles, and it's a 3-degree glide slope, and they are coming right down this rail at a steady speed and at a steady descent rate, and everything is stabilized. That's the word we're looking for. Everything's stabilized. They are on a stabilized approach, and they've been on a stabilized approach for 10 or 15 minutes. What you're not seeing in commercial aviation is you're not seeing these giant jets or even smaller jets doing this roll in hero, we're a little bit high, let's get her down and jump, the kind of thing you see in general aviation all the time. This is so predictable for them. That line of camels goes out so long and so far that the pilots have something, in many cases, 15, 20 minutes, at least that sometimes in a commercial airliner, 15 or 20 minutes to get this thing right on the glide slope, to get your target airspeed just exactly nailed, and then really you just kind of need a deck of cards to pass the time, right? I mean, it's like, perfect, right down there, no last-minute drama, no big corrections, no sudden changes in airspeed or altitude. And once we learned how to do that, we stopped having aircraft accidents. They just pretty much stopped. So they're not flying patterns. To close this subject out, you would think that would work for general aviation airlines as well, but unfortunately, or fortunately, you can't stack general aviation airplanes that big, and the difference in speeds in general aviation is much higher. Commercial jets generally fly faster than Piper Cubs do, but commercial jets don't fly a whole lot faster. In fact, many of them fly slower than a Learjet, and a Learjet and a Piper Cub are going to the same airport at Van Nuys. So you got one airplane that wants to fly an approach at 60 knots, you get another one that wants to fly an approach at 160 knots, you got a problem. Commercial airliners, you've got guys that all want to fly 150 and maybe they're 10 knots higher or slower, so on. And you don't talk to center. Center is a sort of an intermediary thing. So just to close this up for the 7th time, so you know it must be serious now. If you're flying from Los Angeles to New York, the general procedure is you're at the gate, you call, you get your get the conditions at the airport, you file your instrument clearance. They read the clearance. You tell them what you want, or they've already got it filed. You read it to them. They give you the clearance. You read the clearance back. If you got the clearance right, then you go to ground. Ground is what controls the taxiways. They sit up in the tower, usually with the tower people. And then once you've got your clearance, you basically call ground, Van Nuys ground, and you say, I'm here I am. It's who you are, where you are, and what you want. For me, it's Van Nuys ground, good afternoon, Long Easy 506 Delta Bravo, Southwest parking, taxi 16 right, full length with Echo. And what that basically means is who you are, where you are, and what you want. Who you are, we're Long Easy 506 Delta Bravo. Where you are, I'm at Southwest parking. What do I want? I want a taxi to runway 16 right, and I have information Echo, which is the updated hourly information telling you what's going on at the airport. And they say 16 Delta Bravo, taxi 16 right via Alpha. And I say taxi 16 right via Alpha. We all on the same page, and off I go. So flying from Los Angeles to New York, you get your clearance, then you talk to ground. Ground controls the taxiways. Ground will get you to the departure runway, and at which point you switch to tower. You're not in the air yet, but you're about ready to go. Holding short of the runway, you switch to tower. You wait for your takeoff clearance. That sounds something like, in general aviation, something like Van Nuys Tower, 6 Delta Bravo, holding short 16 right for a straight-out departure. Say they'll say 6 Delta Bravo, that's my call sign, my tail number rather. Straight out departure approved, clear for takeoff 16 right, or they'll say 6 Delta Bravo, hold position, and I'll say holding position, and so on. So you get your takeoff clearance from the tower. Now, For most of us VFR pilots, you say goodbye to the tower and you just kind of buzz along for next hour and you do the thing in reverse. But commercial airlines are all on instrument flight plans. So basically, the second they get their takeoff clearance, they start rolling, they get into the air, and once the wheels are up, it happens real fast. It's probably certainly within the first 20 or 30 seconds, I would think, of them leaving the runway. Once that airplane is up off the runway and wheels up, the tower, especially a place like LAX, they're too damn busy. Paramedics says it's been 8 years since the last crash with fatalities on a U.S. flight. That may be true, but they were on a puddle jumper. They were not on a big commercial airliner. And when I say big, I mean the smallest ones like the A320. We have not had a crash of a twin-engine jet carrier like a 737 since 2001. Fatalities. We had the Sullenberger miracle. But anyway, the jets take off, and you're on your commercial flight, and pretty much the second those wheels are up, 20 seconds later, something like that, once you're off the ground and out of their hair, LAX tower will say, Southwest 327 contact SoCal departure on 127.9 or whatever the frequency is. And pretty much instantly, you're not talking to the airport anymore. You're talking to departure. And what departure's got to do is departure's got a bunch of little targets. They're not landing airplanes. Departure is looking at you. SoCal departure is saying, how do I get this airplane, which is flying out to the west, how do I get it to turn around, head back to the east, because he's going to New York, he's not going to China. So they'll take you off out of runway, and you're over the ocean. You'll start a left turn. You'll come around, go over Catalina. They'll get you to an altitude. Then they'll cross the landing traffic much higher than it, and you go on your merry way. After SoCal departure is finished with you, they will get you out of the immediate vicinity of Los Angeles. They'll get you out of the airspace and get you well on your way. And everybody knows where you're going, so they're expecting you. And once you leave SoCal departure, somewhere around, I don't know, I'd say 10,000 feet, 12,000 feet, something like that, they'll tell you Southwest 637 contact LA Center on 123.4, whatever the frequency is for that. Then you talk to LA Center. And that's as high as you go. Center controllers are looking at huge amounts of airspace. I want to say that between Los Angeles and New York, I want to say maybe there's six or seven centers, maybe fewer than that. If you're going north, you hand off from LA Center, you talk to, is it Grand Rapids? No, not Grand Rapids. I forget what the one in Oregon is. In any event, you go LA Center, they hand you off to Phoenix Center. Phoenix Center hands you off to, Salt Lake or whoever. You're just basically flying along, and you're absolutely level. And they sit there and you drink your cocktails and you eat your peanuts and pretzels and you watch your movie, and every 45 minutes or so, you start on one radar screen, you move your way all the way to the other. You're on the other side of the center, and then center will say, Southwest 627. Contact Phoenix Center on this frequency. Good day, and you say good day, and you pick up the new frequency. It's like Phoenix Center, Southwest 627, level 3,300, and they got you, and then off you go. So that's how it works. And as you get close to the other end, then the exact same procedure happens in reverse. You start descending, and finally center will say, okay, contact Kennedy approach at this frequency. You switch to Kennedy approach. Their job is not to land the airplane. That's Kennedy Tower's job. Kennedy approach will basically sequence you. Kennedy approach is looking at a large hunk of airspace, not nearly as big as center, but it's a big hunk of airspace around John F. Kennedy, and that includes LaGuardia and all the rest of it. And Kennedy approach is basically saying, okay, you're coming to come here, we're going to put you here, and they start setting up the sequence so these guys start getting in that nice little string of camels going in. And as you get pretty close to the runway, you're on the right instrument approach for the correct runway, and the spacing is good, and your airspeed is good, and so on, and then just pretty close to landing. Maybe 2 or 3 minutes out at the most, probably. They'll tell you, contact Kennedy Tower on this frequency. And the last, minute or two of the flight and the landing, you're talking to the guys in the tower. All the rest of these people are watching radar scopes buried in regular-looking buildings down there. But they'll give you Kennedy Tower, and Kennedy Tower will say Southwest 627 or whatever your number is, clear to land, runway, whatever. In LAX, it'd be 25 left or something. So you go ahead and land, you pull off the runway, and once you're off the runway, you contact Kennedy Ground. Kennedy Ground will get you to your gate, you shut her down, and basically you get some more fuel in that baby, turn around, do it again. It's an absolute miracle, and it happens something like 40,000 times a day. And I know this sounds kind of obvious, but when you wouldn't really appreciate how safe flying is unless 40,000 times a day you had to turn on the news and have a reporter breathlessly say that Southwest Flight 237 has just landed safely in John F. Kennedy. U.S. Air 622 has just landed safely at John F. Kennedy, and so on and so on and so on, 40,000 times a day, every day for 16 years. That's millions and millions and millions and millions of times that they do this without even a hiccup. It's an absolute miracle. It's a miracle. It's simply the most miraculous thing that's ever, engineering-wise, ever happened to this species, and it's good to be a tiny little part of it. Last one.